a dream but feel stuck, if you are facing obstacles that seem overwhelming, or if you just need a dose of motivation to keep pushing forward, then you are in the right place. So buckle up, dreamers. Anchor Your Dreams is not just a podcast, it's a community of dreamers supporting dreamers, women supporting women. Subscribe, follow along, and let's navigate the seas of ambition together. Thank you for joining me on this adventure. Get ready to be inspired, motivated, and empowered. The journey begins now.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's nice to see you, Megan.
Oh, so nice to see you too. Okay, sorry, my dog is supposed to be going on a pack run today, so I may have to pause for a second to put her outside.
That's awesome. Is that where like the van comes and picks them up and takes them? Oh my God, I love it.
Yes, and yeah, it's funny because originally I thought I wasn't going to be home when they would come to pick her up because I planned it for Tuesdays, and basically every single time I've been home. And anyways, it's just so I just may have to pause, and I feel awful already.
No, I'm excited for you and your dog. Actually, my dog would love it. I've got her outside right now with like 2 bones that I filled with peanut butter last night and put in the freezer. So like hopefully that'll keep her quiet for the duration of our conversation, but there's no guarantees.
So I would love for you to just share a little bit about what your journey has been like to get where you are now.
It's been an incredible journey, really. I was just saying to my husband Alex the other night that like even though I just published this book, there was like 2 other books that took years to write to get me to this one published one. And then like so much before that had to happen because I never really saw myself as a writer. I for a long time was on this path that was like flip-flopping back and forth between science and fashion or design, and my heart was always in design and always in fashion, and I don't think I ever really had the confidence or was under the impression that that could be a viable career path. And so I had this science background and did all my education in science and didn't really know how to make that a career path either. And so I just flip-flop back and forth between the 2 of them like all my life. And the very last sort of like career I would say that I had was working in Courtney at a water lab. And when I lost that position because the lab itself got bought by a larger lab, and so they let most of the staff go, it was a total like ego death for me, a total crisis. And like I just was unraveled by that sort of loss and that loss of identity. And that's where sort of the writing journey came in to save me, really, in a strange kind of way. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with like this large piece of paper and just writing down on it like all the sort of like skills that I had, all of the qualities that I felt were important, and like where was this going to take me. And like I did a sort of like a deep dive into like all the sort of personal growth, what would you call them, like quizzes, and like, you know, I'm a INFJ and all these things, and like what are all these pieces and how can I put them together into something. And that led me to blogging because somewhere in there something said like, because of who you are and your personality, you might be a good writer, you might enjoy writing. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll try it. But the first blog that I did was actually a fashion related blog where I was designing clothing, like an item of clothing every week for a year, and then blogging about it. And I got more feedback on the writing than I did on the designs. And ironically, the writing piece again was like something that the blog kind of forced me to do, because I just took a lot of pictures of what I was sewing and I thought, oh, that'll tell the story. And the blog is like, no, you have to have a minimum amount of words. Like there is a requirement that you have to write something. And I was like, damn it. So I started sharing more and more about the experience of just like the design process and creating the clothes and what was going into sort of all of that. And that just led me to more and more writing. And then I started another blog about breath work. And I thought, okay, well, maybe if I do enough of this breath work blog, it could be a book. And that's where the idea of a book kind of like started. And then it just went from there. I started writing a totally different book. And from that became my memoir, which I didn't see coming when I started that book. And then after that, I evolved this whole soul selves framework that I have, which is another book. And now, sort of out of the blue, came this idea to write about fashion metaphors and spirituality. And actually, what ended up happening was I was looking for an editor for my soul selves framework book. I had sent it to Namaste Publishing. And I was so excited about that they were interested in reading it. They looked at the proposal and within days, they're like, yes, we want to read it. And so I sent it to them, and months and months and months went by. And I finally reached out to them and they're like, well, it didn't pass the editorial review. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means, but I apparently need an editor. And so I was trying to find someone to edit the book who would understand the book, because it's not a real easy sort of concept to understand, I think. And I found this woman, Stephanie Gunning, who was the editor of another book that I really enjoyed called Rich as Fuck. She says it in like symbols and all the things or whatever. And so it's a really sort of like, it felt really in alignment in terms of the sort of content. And when I reached out to Stephanie, she was so keen and helpful, and she got back to me right away, and she's like, well, send me a copy of the soul selves framework. And she had a quick look at it, and we had a conversation, and she was super honest. She's like, there's a lot going on in this, like, I think you need to break it down into many books, sort of thing. And I said, well, I had this other idea that's been floating around in my head about fashion metaphors and calling it Buddha's closet. And as we chatted about this concept, she was like, immediately this sort of light bulb started going off, and you could see like how excited she was about it. And she's like, there's something there. Like, she's like, tell me a little bit more about yourself. And so I talked with her for a bit, and she's like, that's your preface. And then I'm like, okay. She's like, okay, this, get back to me in the new year. Cause it was probably December when we're having this conversation. And she's like, if you want to go ahead with this, let's roll it out. We could do it for spring cleaning. And she had this whole vision that instantly came together in this first conversation. And the excitement from her behind it was enough to just like make me drop everything else and just go full speed ahead on Buddha's closet. And she came up with cleaning as a path to enlightenment in that first conversation. And like, it was practically done before it was even written, which was so cool. So that's the sort of journey, I guess you could say, for how everything came to be where it is now. So,
well, I love that. I've heard a lot of writers say, like, all the stuff before, there's usually one piece that they feel like everything before that was just stepping stones. It was all mostly practice to get to that one written piece that they feel is a highlight of their writing career. I love that. It's when you find people who understand you without even having to say so much, like, it almost seemed like she really understood what you were thinking, but also feeling, and the energy around this. The preface of this book, like, I was like, this is wild. This is absolutely, like, I used to watch Fashion File when growing up. Every single Saturday I would watch Fashion File. It was like, I couldn't couldn't take my eyes off of the clothing. I was so intrigued by the designers and how they created and came up with it. And in grade 6, I had to write, I don't even know what you would call it. Like I had to create a presentation, and I chose a designer. And like, it's not that I would sit and sketch designs or anything like that, but there was something about it all that I just really, really loved. And I did kind of like, something happened where it just didn't ever seem attainable or achievable. Like, I mean, I was not in a household that fostered creativity in that sense. I did grow up with sewing. I started sewing when I was like 6, but it wasn't like from a place of being creative. It was just like skills. This is how you sew a straight line. This is how you create a bag. But anything else around that, I just wasn't able to get into for one reason or another. But where I was going with that is it just the preface of the book, I was like, oh my gosh, I see so much of myself in a lot of this story, the journey. And I love fashion, creating, but also just as of recent, like the idea of slowing down and going through the process of things. I like, for instance, with this podcast, I have a pattern of rushing in because I'm so excited. I want to do the thing. And then I fill my plate, what I like to call more of like a turkey platter. I have a turkey platter and I fill that up. And then I start to burn out near the end. Like as we're getting to the last, few bits on the platter, I start to burn out and slow down. Well, it's because I'm not actually going through the process. I'm not actually being present each individual thing that I need to get done. And so in the book, when you said, take each item of clothing and stay with the thought that comes up, I was like, pew, like mind blown, like, of course we're not going to go rushing in and put things in their respective bins of whether you're going to donate or give away or sell. Yes, this is exactly what I needed to hear and read in this moment, and I loved it. This idea of slowing down and everything, I really felt called into that with the book as well. The idea that our closets are a metaphor for our minds and that clothes are a metaphor for each thought. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been particularly like significant to me on my personal growth and spiritual journey is this idea of paying attention to my thoughts. I think when I really made that distinction that I could listen to each thought and just let it go. Like there's this moment, I think, when I became the observer of my thoughts as opposed to believing and identifying with every thought that I was having. And it's such a significant like line in the sand, so to speak, right? And every day I have to draw that line again and bring myself into that awareness that, oh, that's a thought I'm thinking, but that's not who I am, right? And making that distinction has been so fundamental in terms of taking that next step forward in terms of my personal growth and my spiritual growth and letting things go, right? It's a huge part of it. And meditation, like sitting in meditation, really sort of shines such a light on this process, right? Because when we're sitting still, our eyes are closed or we're staring at a candle flame or whatever is sort of the like typical meditative kind of environment is, we realize how many thoughts we have and how sort of out of control they feel. And there's that term, the monkey mind. And I was never good at that kind of meditation. Like that never appealed to me at all, right?
Yeah,
And
me either at all. Like,
yeah,
still
yeah.
no.
No, I totally agree with you, right? But I kind of realized like now as I'm going through my day-to-day life, like every moment is that sort of meditation, and there's opportunities all the time to be able to just like bring my awareness to what I'm thinking at any given time and be like, "Oh, that's not a good thought to have right now. Like, why am I thinking that?" And I'm like, that's my ego or whatever. And I'll just be like, okay, let's think of something else. And it took a lot of practice initially to recognize when I was thinking something and to come up with alternatives to think something different, to like push that thought out or replace it. And the more awareness that I had of, these thoughts that I was having and the beliefs and all of these things, there's also that space that exists between the thoughts where, they describe it sort of as, that's when you're just like pure awareness. And finding more and more moments like that to connect with that have really deepened my own sense of satisfaction, I guess you could say. And so in relation to my closet being my mind and my thoughts being, or my clothes being my thoughts, there's this beautiful metaphor where you can take everything out of your closet, and as I do, I just pile it all on my bed here, right? And then I'm looking at each item of clothing and I'm like, there's thoughts that are coming up, and some of the items of clothing make me feel really, really good, and other ones, don't have very good associations with them. Like maybe it doesn't fit anymore, and so I'm hard on myself about, the size and the shape of my body, and I'm like, well, why am I putting that back in my closet, or why am I putting that thought back in my mind when I can choose something that's going to, bring me a greater sense of satisfaction. And so I'm building this practice of like literally putting things back in my closet and creating, a seasonal wardrobe out of things that bring me joy and are, positive thoughts and experiences, and then setting the rest aside. And whether or not I donate it or sell it or use it as a rag or whatever happens after that, it is something I can look at again later at a later time, possibly too, right? I think one of the most satisfying, I keep using that word, but that's essentially what it comes down to a lot of the time, or like fulfilling experiences when I'm in my closet, is that it's like permission for me to play, and it's one of those places where I can just have fun and get to know myself. And what I realized was while I was doing that and trying all these different clothes on and really not making any decisions about anything at any point, other than like, I like the way this looks, but this needs a little tweak, and so on, is that eventually there would always come this point where I find myself in this outfit, and like it was almost like this experience of bliss started to sort of like rise up within me. And I heard this other spiritual teacher, Michael Singer, talk about this on one of his YouTube channels. Well, on his YouTube channel, one of his podcasts, I guess you could say, on YouTube. And he said, when you're trying something on, you're in the store and you have that feeling rise within you that you're like, oh, I really like this. He's like, it's not the item of clothing that's bringing you that sense of joy. It's that you're recognizing a part of yourself that you don't often see. And I realized like that's what's happening when we're trying our clothes on, literally. And we're finding what I call the unchanging self. So by changing our clothes, literally changing our clothes, we eventually connect with this part of ourselves that's like our true identity. And it's a part of ourselves that's never changing. It's that observer self that is just watching all the thoughts happening and letting them go and just being a witness to it all. And when you tap into that part of yourself, and then like celebrate it and get used to that feeling, it gets easier and easier to find that again. And then you're making decisions from such a beautiful place. And you no longer, are rooted in ego. You're not rooted in all of those thoughts of identity. And anyways, I'm going down the rabbit hole.
No, that's okay. I mean, I think a lot of people can certainly relate to that when it comes to clothing, whether there's someone that seeks clothing based on a trend or something that is trending, or just to wear clothes. That I think a lot of people, and I think for myself, I used to wear way more fashionable, quote unquote, fashionable things because I felt good in my skin and I felt like I could, quote unquote, pull these things off. So I definitely, for myself, I'll walk in my closet. What happened? Like, it's so bland. It's not, it's more functional now, but I still love fashion. I love the idea of the creations. And yeah, like even when every once in a while I would see a little video of you pop up with these outfits on, and they're bright and they're playful and I loved watching that because it really reminded me of that kind of play that I used to be able to do. And when I was reading that bit in the book, I was like, what do I do for play? What do I do? It's not clothing, because I tie myself and my worth and all the things into what I no longer can fit in. And I realize what I really need to do is go in there and follow along your book and all the things, and really create that playful experience again. I also, with makeup, I like makeup I play with, and maybe I think now that we're talking out loud and I'm now going down my own rabbit hole, I think I just kind of realized, it didn't matter what shape my face was, makeup laid down the same. So I think I just naturally sort of gravitated and defaulted to playing with makeup then versus the clothing, but still found that creativity and that playfulness out of it.
Yeah.
I want to touch on sort of the cleaning out our closets and this idea that spiritual fulfillment can be found cleaning in a form of meditation, because that's something that I struggle with. I kind of like, I go in my moments of like, there's stuff everywhere. I don't want this in my house. I need to get rid of it. And like, I just want to chuck it all. And then I find myself like, okay, chill out. Use this time of vacuuming, which I actually do enjoy. I do enjoy vacuuming for a number of reasons, but use this time to just relax and just walk around your house. And like, for me, I have one of those built-in vacuums, so it's a super long hose and it feels really easy to just walk around and hear that everything get sucked up in the vacuum. But I do, I think now, reading your book, I think I do find it as a form of meditation, but I didn't realize that that's what I was doing because I'm moving. And as someone, like you mentioned, who doesn't find like that normal or that traditional form of sitting and meditating, that's how I realized that that's how my meditation comes, is vacuuming, mowing my lawn, like doing those sorts of things.
Yeah. I love that you recognize that, because that was, a real pivotal moment for me too. Like I had, and I still have it. I mean, I was cleaning out my shower today, giving it like a deep cleanse, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. Like, and like meditation and cleaning can be so similar that way, right? It's like, I know I should do this and it's gonna make me feel better after I do it, but just getting started can be like the biggest hurdle, right? And when I realized like I can combine the two in that sense, it made cleaning so much more satisfying and so much more joyful. I'm still not very good at it a lot of the time, but like one of the things that really became part of my own practice is being at home and vacuuming. I've got the same vacuum system like you do, the good old vacuum flow. But I'd put my headphones on and I'd listen to like Abraham Hicks or some sort of podcast. And so timing that like physical process and then like being open to absorbing, this information as it's coming down, I'd have a lot of really pivotal or, kind of breakthroughs while taking care of my house. And it's cleaning is just, again, it's that metaphor, like it's never going to be done. You can get it to a certain point and then it's going to change again and things are going to get dirty and you have to clean. And it's just like those thoughts, they just keep coming back and keep coming back. And you just have to be like, there it is again. I'm just going to recognize it and let it go. And in some sort of ironic way, after taking time off and being a stay-at-home mom for a long time and writing, the first job that I took on going back to work was being a commercial cleaner and going to these businesses in the evenings and cleaning. And I was so resentful about it at first. I will be totally honest. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this, to support my family and like show up, but like, I'm not happy about it. And then I'd get there and I'd put my headphones on and I'd listen to my podcast or, use something on YouTube. And by the time I left, I was in a way better mood than I was when I got there. Like, and I realized this whole act of cleaning was totally part of my spiritual practice. And once I embraced it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is my special time. I'm excited to go to work and be completely alone and just tune into myself and have this really deep meditative experience while like moving my body and having that sort of sense of when I leave that place, it's in a better place than it was when I got there. And I feel like I'm almost like blessing it. And I think of it like 3 nights a week, I'm still doing it. I clean the Toyota dealership. And it's like that Toyota dealership is like my temple now, right? Like I'm there and I'm sweeping the floors and I'm like, I'm just like a monk in there, a little monk in there cleaning and getting things all ready. And I feel like I hope on some level that like when the people return to work the next day, like that space feels different. Like it feels cleaner, not just physically, but like energetically, because I've been in such a good space when I've been in there that I hope that carries through somehow. Right. And so as much as I try and do that at home, it's not as like poignant, but it's been such a good practice for me. And I'm really grateful that that's how life has unfolded, is for me to be able to do that. And I honestly didn't tell anybody that I was doing that for like the first year that I did it, because I was so ashamed of it and like, oh my God, I'm a cleaner kind of thing. But like now, I'm so much happier to talk about it because it is such a beautiful space for me to be in, right? And there's nothing shameful about that at all. So.
No, absolutely nothing shameful. And look at what it has provided you. And now look what it has provided us, readers, right? Like, I love that. One of the tips that you have for staying motivated during maybe some more challenging times is to believe the more self-evaluation that we give ourselves, the more external validation shows up. I loved reading that because maybe it's the space that I'm in myself, but I feel like I just kind of went through a breakthrough around this whole external validation piece and like not feeling like I need it any longer in my life. Don't get me wrong, there's still times where I'm feeling like it creeps in every once in a while, but I'm much better at kind of taking in those thoughts and thinking about them and kind of working through them and going into that space. But I'd love to hear like your take on where you got to this space yourself.
That is Yeah, where did it originate? That it's been an ongoing process, there's no question. And I know so much of it has like stemmed out of the seeking, I guess you could call that we do on this on our spiritual journey, and like this question of like, who am I? Who am I? Right. And I want to give you like a really like solid example of when it landed for me, but I don't know if I can. I think a good part of it like had to do with this whole grief journey that led into my spiritual journey, and like this realization that the the love that I thought I was missing from the person that I lost was actually always like within me. And so I guess this is really where it originated from, is this idea that I was like externalizing all of those feelings onto this person who was no longer in this world. And so it felt like I could never feel that way again. But in going through my whole writing journey and writing about my grief and sort of doing a deep dive into that, there was this moment where like I'm like, oh no, I don't need that person to feel that love anymore, because I always felt it within me. It was always in me. Like I could summon that amount of love and that sensation and all of those good vibes, whatever you want to call them, within me, because that's where they were when I felt them. Like they weren't because of him. They were always within me. And when I was able to really own that, then it kind of made everything else fall into line in the same way. It's just like it's all within me. I can't look externally for something because it's never out there. It's just me feeling the things that I'm feeling, and so I get to decide what I feel at any given time. And I guess a good part of like with the soul selves framework is this idea of taking responsibility for how we're feeling and for a lot of things. And so once I stop blaming the outside world for things that were happening and feeling like a victim, to all of the things. I still feel like a victim to cleaning occasionally, right? In my shower this morning, then all of that external melts away, right? And it becomes a total choice. Everything becomes a choice in terms of how I want to feel or don't want to feel. And it's so empowering, really, when you're able to like own that. And
Liberating.
yeah, it is totally liberating. Yeah, because you can now sort of like steer yourself towards the better feeling thought and the better feeling thought and the better feeling thought. And when, something jumps in that's disrupting that, you're like, oh, okay, let me look at that, and you take a moment and you kind of like, oh, what is that? Okay, do I need that? Why am I feeling that way? And I honestly, I'm at a point now where when something triggers me, I heard something the other day actually that there's sort of a new phrase where triggers is sort of like not socially acceptable anymore. And I can't remember what it was, but it's like where something like emotionally unregulates me. Maybe that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited when that happens because I'm like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to learn more about myself. And like, what is it? I'm like, okay, bring it on. Like I want to find out what is causing me to get unregulated, and how do I get back into regulation now with that same piece in place, but in a new way. Like, how do I navigate with it as opposed to just like it being a barrier to moving forward or doing whatever, right? Like, yeah.
Totally. I'm sorry. I've just been like nodding my head because everything that you've said is like, I feel like it, and I do understand that everyone has to go through their own journey, and I can't necessarily say that there's only one thing that has come up in my life that has caused me to get to this place as well. It really is all encompassing of the last, well, 39, so the last 39 years. However, one of the things that stood out was, and you did bring it to that point, is taking responsibility. Like, I do feel there's this external responsibility we do tend to put on other people. It's a bit of a dependence. And then when we can no longer be dependent on that person to hold these feelings and be that vessel for us, it really, that grief goes really deep, because then we don't know what to do with all these feelings that we have had the whole time internally. It's just that we didn't attribute it to ourselves. We attribute it to others around us, whether it's a person, an animal, anything like that. So I felt like that was, you said the word was taking responsibility, and how you just brought up being excited. Like, I can really relate, and I'm only kind of laughing, and maybe, I don't know, because it sounds wild in a lot of ways, right? Especially, I think, with that word trigger. And I don't want to take away from people who aren't in this space yet and maybe won't get there. That's totally fine. I can relate to that. Just a couple months ago, I got to this place. I was asked some pretty deep questions about why I was having a hard time being seen. And where it went to was a place that got me so emotionally dysregulated that in the past would have sent me on a downward spiral, like into a state of deep depression. It totally would have sent me there. Doing all the work that I've done, I was able to then, yes, like, I wouldn't necessarily say at first was I excited, no, but I was able to hold space for myself to sit there and question, what is it about this emotional dysregulation that I'm feeling? Where is it coming from, and why? And within like 12 hours and there was sleep during that 12 hours, but I was able to kind of be like, okay, this is another breakthrough. This is another, like, okay, I'm ready to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can literally see that as you're talking about it. Like, that breakthrough is like, is that ego cracking, right? That layer of identity that was covering up the light of your soul, and all of a sudden it like cracked open, and there's more of that soul light shining through, right? And those are very difficult moments, like, and often we talk about that in terms of like ego death, or like a dark night of the soul. And often when we have those breakthroughs, or those moments of unregulation, it's because our ego is trying so hard to keep that covering on, right? And it's fighting with all that it has, and it's going to throw everything at you, all of these thoughts, all of these things, to try and keep you from changing, right? And once you recognize that there is that process happening within you that is somewhat or completely unconscious, you can kind of, again, step back and be the observer of it, and be like, oh, I see what you're doing, ego, like, but I love you, and I'm ready to change. And you're not dying. We're just releasing this part of ourselves, and like, you're actually embracing it. And without a doubt, there's often times that, we're going to, like you say, spiral into a depression, because that is part of our ego identity, having that light shone on it, and sort of unraveling. And it's a very difficult, well, it can be a very difficult thing to do. But I think the more awareness we have of it, and the more we sort of step into it and embrace ourselves, I don't want to say that it gets easier, but it potentially can also get easier. And like, we don't necessarily have to have that's place where, our energy is a lot lower, where we're sort of like fighting that resistance. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that I learned about depression in general, is it's just like, this is it's a awareness of our ego, right? Like, it's just a very clear emotion that happens when our ego comes to the surface, right? And we have that awareness. And so, yeah, you're so good at articulating all these things. I love it.
Oh, thank you. That's interesting. Like my grade 9 teacher, it's funny. I'm only see, sometimes I can be good at articulating things, and sometimes I don't feel like I can, like I don't see that in myself. It's really interesting. And even when I was younger, my grade 9 teacher was like, "Oh, I definitely see you as a teacher in English." And then by grade 12, I was like failing English. And I don't know what happened, but probably it's because I was forced to read books I didn't want to read and I
Yeah.
had zero interest in. But yeah, it's interesting. That's a whole side tangent. And the other thing I wanted to talk about too is perfectionism. Well, it comes up a lot for me, and that's another thing that I've recently really started letting go of a lot more, is feeling like I have to do everything perfectly. And I get so stuck sometimes on this idea of perfect that it then becomes a barrier, and then I halt all production of all of the things, and then I get absolutely nothing done and do nothing. Like so I'd love for you to share.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because this book has been a total process in letting go of perfectionism, because I don't think I realized at the time how much it was influencing me or impacting me in my own way. But I remember very distinctly lying in bed, and we were probably a couple months into this whole book process, and there's a moment in sleep, kind of like right before waking, and deep sleep, and for me that's when I get these sort of like downloads, or I have this sort of like really luscious connection with, I don't know if you want to call it divine or my higher self or whatever it is, but like all of a sudden I kind of have these, you could call them thoughts that come in, or these sort of like energies that drop in, and this one was like, just it, like it said very clearly to me, it's like, just get it done, like do the best you can and move on. Like, and then it wasn't even so much a thought as it was this whole understanding and this energy, and it's like, just keep moving forward. Like, in order to keep that momentum going, you just do what you can, the best that you can, and let it go. Like, just keep going. And I was like, okay, I understand this to a level that I've never understood it before. And it's like I've got the book here, like just figuring out the cover design, like because we had sort of a publishing date in mind, it's like there are all these boxes that had to be checked in order to accomplish that time and that goal. And if I was going to try and be a perfectionist at every step of the way to check those boxes, like that timeline would be pushed further and further and further away. Like, it becomes kind of like an infinite impossibility. So in order to meet that deadline, you just have to keep checking the boxes, whether they're, perfect or not. It doesn't matter, because it's just you showing up where you are in that moment and moving forward. And so, like, yeah, the cover is like such a perfect example of that, in terms of like, okay, it could be something completely different and perfect, but like, who knows what that really is, right? Like, is it good enough? Yes, it's good enough. Is it, all of the things, and it says what it needs to say and checks the boxes? Then absolutely. And so just keep that momentum going. And so that whole idea of just dropping the perfectionist has been such a release, such a relief too for me. And yeah, like, I think I see how it like harnesses my children in the things that they're doing now too. And so it's such an interesting beast to try and navigate, right? And where it comes from, I don't fully understand that one. It would be neat to spend some time with it and like ask it some questions, whatever it is, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm so grateful for that moment where it just like dropped in and it was just like, just keep moving forward, keep moving forward. And it was just this weight that was lifted off of me. And it just becomes again playful after that, right? Because there is nothing to attain. It just is, right? You're just showing up and showing up the best that you can in that moment. So
Well,
yeah.
I think like I attribute it to a resistance, because each time that perf comes in, it's a resistant energy, and any form of flow I may have had up to that point gets cut off. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I need this to be this way and this to be that way. And then kind of a bit of a spiral into that state. And it can become a bit of like a frenzy, like a mental frenzy of all these different thoughts of what it could be, what it shouldn't be. And yeah, that release of letting go. And also what I've realized too is everything is data as well, like the feedback. So anything to do with, for instance, the podcast, right? Like I don't have perfect sound all the time. And I was getting hung up on that. I was like, okay, how do I make this better? I am not techie with sound boards and this and that, or any form of knowing how I could make sound better. So I would sit with it and I would start to think, okay, well, if I move this way and this way, and then editing would take days and days, and I would come back to it and I would try again over here and try again over there and moving this dial and lifting this sound up. I still didn't know what I was doing. And then I would just basically like stop, and I couldn't even look at what I had done, and I felt like scrapping it all. And that's what essentially also took me a really long time after getting one episode aired, because I was sitting in perfectionism. And then I realized at this moment in time, I needed quantity. Quality would come.
Yeah, that's so true. That's like, yeah, such a excellent metaphor, or not metaphor. It's such an excellent mantra. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. And that's what carries me through. I mean, am I as consistent as I wish? Not necessarily, but that's also life. There's a whole life surrounding everything. But getting back to this book, what are some surprising connections that have come out of you writing this book?
Surprising connections.
It can be with people, it can be with yourself.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the answer to drop in on that one. I know there's been many for sure. Huh.
It's okay. We can come back to that. That's not a problem.
Okay, give me some time. Yeah, I'm sure something will drop in that's gonna like, yeah, surprise me.
No problem. Yeah, and well, what we were just talking about is the perfectionism and sort of just doing our best and keep forward with momentum. And I think I touched on that as well, as just like sort of detaching from the outcome per se, and just keeping moving forward and not allowing our ego to take over. So with that being said, what are some tips that you might have that relates to bringing your dreams into reality?
It has been such an ongoing process for me. And I think such a huge part of that has just been listening to my intuition and trusting my intuition, and really developing that relationship with myself to know when something's, dropping in to listen to it. And like, just even going back to that, what's a surprising thing that I've learned or connection that's come up, like I have really, really had to practice over the years, just listening to that voice as it's coming through, and trusting it, and not like feeling like in this environment that I'm having to script everything that I'm going to say, and trusting myself to set that script aside, because that has taken a long time to get to a place where I can just like communicate from a place of authenticity, right? Like where it's like, my heart and my throat are connecting, and I'm just allowing the words to come out. And so a lot of that definitely is just, yeah, really strengthening that bond that I have with myself and my intuition. And I think it's a really vulnerable thing to do a lot of the time. And so, doing it in small pieces has been very helpful for me along the way. And then, you listen to something and you follow that path, and it's like we're breadcrumbing ourselves, as my friend Monica says. Like, but once we do it, there's this sort of affirmation that we find after listening to that like ping of intuition, to reinforce that relationship, right? And so it just gets stronger and stronger the more that you listen. And I can look back and be like, oh, that was my intuition speaking, and I totally ignored it. And then at the same time, there's this affirmation of like, yeah, you should have listened to that, because look what happened. Like, and so that strengthens the intuition too, right? Like the places where I've sort of let myself down or failed is just as much of a learning as it is when I've followed it and had a positive experience. So it works both ways in that sense too. So,
Well,
yeah.
and I love how right after you said failed, that it's also learning, because truly looking at a lot of things, they are lessons. It's not always easy to understand what that lesson is. And no, I don't personally feel like we're always meant to know what that lesson is in the moment that we're going through it. And as the saying goes, hindsight is 2020, right? Like it's always easier to look back and say that was my intuition, but it also sounds like you're connecting to your own voice and trusting in that. And as we do pick up those or kind of what I like to refer to as following our true north, is we start to trust ourselves. We start to trust, and even if we kind of take a little detour, we're brought back in some way. And I think trusting that we will always come back to that path, it just might take a lesson or two to get there. For me, that's kind of what has certainly helped. As a writer and someone who has now written two different types of blogs, and on multiple books, what are some tips that you might have for someone who is like, I really want to write something. I just have this deep urge to get pen to paper or anything. What would you say to them?
I hear that often, actually. So it's really important to actually sit down and carve out the time to do it, because it can, again, like cleaning and like meditation, writing's right up there with like, I know I should do this and I want to do it, but like, how do I begin? And yeah, like often when I would sit and write, the first 20 minutes, the first 30 minutes easily, it's all just crap. Like, sorry to swear, but like it's gonna be you have to work through all that stuff before something worthwhile starts to emerge, right? And again, it's, as much as it is about speaking, I think that's probably what I love about writing so much, is that I feel like I kind of became a channel. And so the more I gave myself that dedicated space and time to sit and start writing, then I opened up some sort of connection where the words started coming through me. And so once I sort of opened that channel, then I'd go to bed and the words would still come, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's so good, I'm never gonna forget that," and you wake up in the morning and you forgot. You're like, "I know that was really good." There's sort of like this lingering feeling like that was really cool, but what was it? And so I've learned also to, like, when that happens and it's, 3 o'clock in the morning and the words are coming, to get up and write them down, because you can't get that moment back, right?
No.
So
I've written so many awesome rebuttal letters and all sorts of letters to people in my brain at 3 o'clock in the morning, too dang tired to get up, lost everything by the morning. And I too, same thing. Oh yeah, yeah, no, that was great. That was awesome. Okay. Like I really like to take pictures of things in my head. So like I sort of took a snapshot of me in my notes app, because that's what I use a lot for writing random things. And I pictured the words in my notes app, thought that I took this great, wonderful snapshot in my brain, and that as soon as I woke up the next morning, it was all going to be there. And same thing, like, no, woke up like absolutely nothing, but the feeling of having this great, wonderful, like, whatever it was. Yeah,
yeah.
totally get that.
I know. It's like, it's the feeling that, as a writer, I am almost chasing after now, right? Like, I love it when it comes through. And even if I read it, a week later and like, I don't get that feeling again, but I'm like, oh, but I had it at the time and that was so cool. So yeah, yeah.
Love that.
Uh,
Any other points that you feel like you would like to cover that maybe we haven't covered today?
oh, again, such a good question. I think, like, I am now at this place in my journey where, like, I've done the writing and now I have to figure out the marketing. And this is where it's so new for me. And I feel so vulnerable and so overwhelmed. And I'm not really sure, like, what the next step is and what the next step is. And I just have to remind myself to, again, like, I kind of like to think of each book that I have having its own soul. And so in those moments when I'm like half asleep, half awake, I try and, like, reach out to the soul of the book and be like, okay, tell me what's next, right? And I just sort of give it permission to guide me and see what drops in. And I had this beautiful conversation with Bridget Aline Cisco yesterday. She was the publisher for the multi-authored book that I was part of a couple of years ago. And she knows this whole marketing and visibility world so well. And she said to me, like, uh, marketing is just like opening the door. And so having that visual and that sort of like metaphor to work towards was so helpful. And so I think, just like anything, when we're at the beginning of this new journey, is just so important to just keep showing up for it. And like, this goes back to our conversation on perfectionism, right? Like, I don't know how to market myself in this way or market a book,
You're
right?
doing it right now.
Yeah.
You're doing it right now, Kerri.
I was like, am I? I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, this is so surreal. But yeah, just showing up again, like, in my imperfectness and just like putting it out there. So just keep showing up in whatever way you're being called to show up.
Right? Well, and that's the funny thing. Like, I have been thinking about reaching out to you. Our kids go to the same school. I drove in, I saw your car, and I was like, "Oh, I need to talk to Kerri. Maybe I could catch her in person to invite her on the podcast." And then we didn't catch each other that day, and then I messaged you, and you're like, "Yeah, I've been meaning to do the same thing." And I was like, "Oh, like, sometimes I swear, Kerri, like I used to not understand, like, the universe, as I refer to it, nor did I trust anything to do with it. And now there's these things that have been happening, and again, kind of going back to the point about self-valuation, and the more external validation shows up. So I I didn't know what direction this podcast was going to go. I had this idea and the premise for it and everything, but which direction, I didn't know. I'm just showing up all the time and just trying to do what feels good, feels, good for me, but also for the people that I'm going to be talking with. Anyways, point being is that, then it's like the universe is just putting these people and these stories in front of me, and I'm not having to do so much. Whereas like before, I would get hung up on the idea of marketing, whether it was myself or when I was sewing and creating things and trying to sell things, I would get so hung up on marketing them. Like I wasn't connected to the marketing side of things. I disconnected myself from that. Now, of course, that's a whole other story about sales and all the things. But how you also just brought up, it's opening a door. You don't know what is ever going to be on the other side of the door, but you have to open it in the first place. And I feel like, and it sounds like, it's exactly what's happened. Like naturally, I feel like looking at our situation, naturally, that's just exactly what happened. You opened the door, you were open to what was beyond that door. And same thing for me. And this is just kind of like a product of that.
Yeah. I remember that moment so clearly too, because like I just dropped my daughter off at school from her. It was either my son or my daughter. I can't remember. One of them had a ortho appointment or dentist appointment, and I was driving away, and you were there. And as I was like pulling around, like the thoughts totally dropped in, and it was like we were having the same thought at the same time. Like just I love that
I know.
happened. Like yeah.
Yeah.
I should have come all the way around and just been like, had I known, next time I'll do that.
Well, and that's just it. Cause I walk my daughter into her class every day. She needs me to walk her in. So I didn't think I would see you on my way out, but knowing her, she wouldn't have really, I say this very gently, allowed me to stop and chat in that moment. But yeah, so I just was like, yeah, I don't know, to me, this is just like that whole universal thing, connecting people.
Yeah. Well, and like to build on that, like the whole process of this book has been just full of ease like that, which is such an indication for me that just to keep going with it and just keep listening, because like from that very first conversation that I had with my editor and the ease of that and how well it came together, even the writing process and the revision process, like her and I were really co-creating it every step of the way. And it hasn't been one of those things that I've had to push myself into. I'm almost like catching up with it. And as I look back, I can see where the soul of this book has actually been like communicating with other people in order to communicate with me, to be like, this is what you need to be doing right now, Kerri, right? And I was like, no. And when I finally listened, it's just sort of been, just full of ease and just playful. And that's the message that I get. And I talk about this in the book too, like from Spirit, is just be playful on your journey, right? Like find ways to be playful. And if it's playful, then, you're doing the right thing. I don't know if that sounds right, but like for me, it's like, it's an affirmation that I'm on the right path or on the path to whatever is coming next. So, yeah.
Oh, well, I love that. I think ease is such a great word to use in that, because I know some people will say peace. They feel peaceful. And I know over the last, 8 years or so, there's been moments where I'm pushing and pushing and pushing these things that just like sure, maybe some of it I was resistant to, but I also now looking back realize those were not for me. And there's a reason why there was so much more resistance. I feel like the resistance that I meant to work through, I can understand that now.
Yeah.
I can hold that resistance in place, think about it and work through it. A different type of resistance where there is zero feeling of getting through it is really because it's not the right path for me.
Interesting.
And now going back to that intuition piece, now that I've been able to see that over the last several years, I really truly can understand, okay, this is like a little bit of resistance, maybe some ego happening here, but that's something I can work through. That over there, that is not meant for me in any capacity. Like, stop, halt, step away, move away, back the truck up. But yeah, so I like that word ease, because when you do feel at ease for things and you're relaxed in the space, like I also feel like so much more you're open to. So I'll say with that too, with the whole marketing piece, be playful with it, feel at ease with it.
Thank you. I need that reminder.
Write that down in a few spots.
Yes.
Well, Kerri, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I really loved our conversation. I really loved how it flowed. I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on here.
I love our conversation too. These are the conversations that I live for, and I'm so grateful that you reached out and made it happen. And thank you. It means a lot to me. So yeah, it's been a long time coming, Megan.
It's been a long time coming, and I really enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed following along on your journey. And
Likewise.
yeah, I mean, I can't wait to dive deeper into this book and really start applying some of the actions as well. Okay, that's one thing. Do you have one takeaway out of the book that you could potentially give to the listeners?
So there's actually 3. And I say this in the preface, like, everything is your guru, and be playful on your spiritual journey. And then the third one is practice self-love by getting to know your unchanging self.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Anchor Your Dreams. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. A big thank you to our incredible guest for sharing their wisdom and insights. If you resonated with today's episode and want to explore more about turning your dreams into reality, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We have a lineup of amazing guests and valuable content coming your way. Don't forget to connect with us on social media. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. Share your thoughts, insights, and your own journey using the hashtag #AnchorYourDreams. Head over to our website at meganmcquillan.com in the podcast section, where you'll find the show notes, resources, and information about upcoming episodes. Before we wrap up, I want to express my gratitude to each and every one of you. Your support means the world to me, and I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you. Remember, anchored dreams become goals. Anchored goals become results. Until next time, dream big and stay anchored.